they were all working at 14.
Yeah.
So when I finished at Allsop, I had a job at a bank, a London bank called Grindlays,
Right.
Grindlays. But the interesting part was that they used to meet the ships coming from the Far East into the Mersey, into Liverpool, from where they went home for leave or whatever. So we used to go out on the paddle boat tender to announce at the purser's office that members of the Grindlays Bank were there to offer help for the clients. So, of course, we're going out to these ships and seeing these guys coming back with, like millionaires, which of course they were at that time, the way things were at home. And so that sowed the bug about going to sea. And the first job I had was as a buoy rating, which gave me £10 a month wages, all found, of course, as you were living and sleeping and eating on the ship. And my first trip to sea was in 1947, when I sailed from the Albert Dock on one of PSNC, Pacific Steam Navigation Company, what they called intermediate, cargo passenger. Only a dozen passengers, loads of cargo. And we sailed from Liverpool in March of 1952, and it took us 28 days to get to our first port of call.
Which was?
Havana, Cuba, which was an entirely different world to a young lad like me. And then we went through the Panama Canal,
yes.
Brazil, anyway, all of South America, we hit down the coast, and then all the way back and through the Panama Canal and into the West Indies, and then we came back to Liverpool. So that was my first taste of, I need to say I cried my eyes out. But
so that was at 28.
I'll give you an idea. We went to Ecuador, and to get to, the name of the town was Guayaquil, and to get to Guayaquil you had to go up the Guayaquil River. And it had a strong current going up. The ship was doing about 8 knots, creeping along against the tide. And we all started having a laugh and a joke, said, be all right coming back. The skipper would be able to get his water skis out because it'll go so fast with the current behind, you see. And some of the things I saw on there, when they get into these ports, everything had to be hoisted and out the hold. And they let the natives operate the hoist sometimes. And we see pipes going brand new cars, like a lance, we're swinging, and the skipper's staring his head up. And so
what would you do then?
Mainly wash the dishes and clean cabins, sort of any job that was too hard on one man, they'd throw me in as an extra too. So from there, during the war, they had small aircraft carriers. I don't know if you've heard of these. They're called Woolworth Carriers. They carried 4 planes. They were very small. The planes could take off, but they couldn't land. So when they were on convoy and they were called out, they'd fly off the deck and crash into the sea and pick the pilot up. That was the routine. They also carried grain in the hold. So they go to Halifax in the summer and they used to pump the grain into the hold, you see, which was very convenient for the crew, because when you bought your loot, as we call it, in either Halifax or Montreal, where do you stow it? You stowed it away from the customs. How could you stow it away from the customs? Where? Tied it to the iron ladders into the hold till tons of wheat went on top of it, so the customs couldn't find it. Then you had your sources in Liverpool where you sold your nylons at £1 a pair. It all led to Southampton, to that ship there, the original Queen Elizabeth. So, nothing ventured, nothing gained. I go down to Southampton and join the Queen Elizabeth as an orchestra steward. In other words, I looked after I was one of the stewards who looked after the orchestra. The orchestra was supplied by two well-known band leaders at that time, Ambrose and Geraldo. I don't know if you've ever heard of them. No. They supplied the musicians. And of course the musicians were good, and they were good and bad. It was like everything else. But one particular saxophonist I got quite chummy with, and he was my first spiv, if you know the term spiv, a gangster, like small-time gangster. Anybody involved in semi-illegal stuff was a spiv, and he was the greatest spiv I ever met. Well, he was a saxophonist, and one of the things he brought in were reeds for the mouthpiece. Couldn't get them in England. Went like hotcakes. Second-hand typewriters. You'd get one, I'd get one. Take it off the ship. He'd collect them, stock them in London. So it was well got. I was telling you this tale because we became quite friendly to the point where later on I met my wife when I was on that ship. Now the ship's routine was Southampton, New York, Southampton. 5 days, 5 days. 1 day, 1 day. 1 day in port in each place. You had to do 10 trips and you got a trip off for a round trip, 20 days at home. And I was on the ship for 4 years, at which time I met my wife, who was on that photograph up there, and she's on various photographs here. And how it happened, see, coming into Southampton for one night, there's no way I could get to Liverpool. But every 5 trips, they gave you a trip off. So I came home. Occasionally there was a major fault with the engines or something. She'd be in dry dock in Southampton for a week. So they would give us a weekend off. That was Friday to Monday. Out Friday and home, back on a ship on Monday. Whereby up to Liverpool on the Friday. And there was a famous night dance hall in Liverpool called the Grafton Rooms. Saturday I get dressed up in my American suit, American collar and tie, whereby it was all Western clothing, black and white at that time. And I go to the Grafton Rooms, crowded. You could walk on the heads. 4 girls standing on the edge of the platform of the dance floor. Asked one of them to dance on the floor. She said, "Are you a seaman?" I said, "What makes you think I'm a seaman?" Dressed. She said, "The way you're dressed." I said, "Yeah." She said, "I don't like seamen." So that was a brilliant start. So I had the last, I took her back to her friends, and I asked her for the last dance, and I found that one of the girls with her was her elder sister. So I took her back and said, "You don't mind how I take your young sister home?" So that sort of set the cat amongst the pigeons, So we had the last dance, and she went to her cloakroom, and I went to mine. Half an hour goes by. Later on she said she hoped I'd buggered off. So that's some kind of impression I made. So I'm at the dance. Lines of people for buses. A taxi come along, wave the taxi down. Take her home to, she lived in Huyton. Got out the taxi, walking along the street where she lived, so I could see the name of the street. Get to her house, could see the number of the house. Tried to make a date for the next night. Got a boyfriend. Shot down. So go back to the ship, and I wrote her a letter from New York, which she received and answered, asking her if I could see her when I came home on leave. 3.5 months later we were married. And we've been married for over 50 years. There's 79 years now. Agency reinforcement.